Hey guys, this video is showing the installation process and use of the Scalpel Blade Holder that I designed to replace the can opener bit on Leatherman tools such as the Wave, Charge, Signal, and Curl. I came up with this idea because I know that there are a couple other designs out there where you can replace the main blade or the serrated blade on your tool with a scalpel blade, a larger one. But for me, the can opener is a pretty useless tool. I think I've only ever used it, well, I've never used it in the, 15 years or so, 20 years of owning a Leatherman. So I came up with this solution to where this could be taken out and replaced with a removable, easily changeable, always sharp scalpel blade. So this uses a number 11 scalpel blade. It's basically the style that surgeons use. So the process is pretty simple, and actually if you've never taken apart a Leatherman before, this particular pivot is the easiest one to change out because there's only a couple of components. But there are a few things to note throughout the process, so I'm going to kind of go through that installation process and kind of touch on some of those key notes that will help install these for those of you who've already purchased it, or for those of you who are thinking about picking one up in the future. All right, so first let's just talk about where it goes and what it is. So right in here is the can opener. You take that out by just loosening these two or removing this bolt from this side out of this, I don't know the term for that, but it's like a tube, a cylinder, a threaded cylinder. And then essentially just put this right in there. And once it's installed, you can install it with the blade on it, and it will clear the plier head as well as the lock mechanism back here, and it doesn't interfere with anything. So the blade can stay installed all the time, and it's tucked neatly and safely out of the way. It's not going to cut your hand or anything, but we'll get to what it looks like once it's installed in a little bit. So the process that I use for this, I do a lot of silver casting, metal smithing. So I took some of those techniques and things that I've used for that and applied it to this. So this is kind of taking my jewelry work and applying it onto my Leatherman tool work, which, if you guys aren't familiar with my other Leatherman designs, I do a lot of 3D printed custom parts for Leatherman tools. And there's a link below the video in the description to where those are. So the first thing I did is I made a 3D model on the computer of basically the can opener, and then I modified that and adjusted it so that it could hold one of these replaceable scalpel bits. So this is 3D printed in resin, and from there I take a rubber mold, a vulcanized rubber molds, basically by laying this in between sheets of uncured rubber and then put it in a pressurized heated vise essentially, and it comes out a block like this, which I then take a scalpel, and that's what I happen to have these around for in the first place, and carefully cut that cured rubber apart. And again, this is something that I've done hundreds of times through jewelry processing work, or jewelry design work. And then you take out, I take out that resin printed model, and you close this back up, and then I then inject through that opening right there molten pressurized wax. And then once the wax has a chance to cure and harden, or dry, cool, and harden, I then open this back up and take out these little guys, which this is a wax version of it. And then I kind of take that through the rest of the lost wax casting process that's used for jewelry making to cast it finally in white bronze. And so white bronze is, it's a copper-based alloy, but it has more of a whitish color to it. And this will kind of tarnish over time. It'll kind of oxidize to a little bit more of a yellow hue. But the nice thing about it is it does polish up pretty easily. And when it is polished, it has a nice silvery quality to it. But it doesn't have the you know, it's a little bit harder than sterling silver, so it's better suited for tool purposes. Okay, so let's talk about how to install this. You only need a few tools. The main ones are two T10 security Torx bits, and I use these Vega bits here, and these work pretty well. They're nice and sturdy and hard. So you need two of those bits and two things to hold them. So I just have a couple of Leatherman bit driver extenders, or one Leatherman one, and then this one is aftermarket third party. I can't remember the name of that company right now, but it works fine as well. So the process is, like I said before, you're going to put one of these into here on this side, on the can opener side, and then you're going to put the other one in the screwdriver side. But the key thing to note here is this one that's on the can opener side is not supposed to turn. It's got a key in it, basically, a flat side that locks into a flat side on this side of the frame. So if you turn this, you are going to either strip out your frame or strip that barrel screw, and that's the term I was looking for earlier. So the thing to do is you're going to hold this side, the can opener side, firm while you unscrew and loosen the screwdriver side. And this may be pretty tough the first time you do it because of the thread lock, the Loctite that Leatherman puts on their tools from the factory. And that's the reason why you need two. If it didn't have Loctite on it, you would basically just unscrew this screwdriver side, and that would be good enough, because like I said, this one is held fixed in place by that flat side on the barrel screw. If it doesn't want to come out, so again, you're stabilizing this side and then you're unscrewing this side over here, and if it doesn't want to come out, you may want to take like a heat gun or something to heat this section here. Probably not a torch, because that could discolor and like lose the temper on the steel. But use a heat gun and get it fairly hot around here, and that'll soften up the thread lock if you're having difficulty. I haven't ever had any trouble opening these just by hand, but your tool may be different than mine. So again, here we go. We're going to unscrew this. And that screw comes out. You want to do this on a clean surface where your parts aren't going to roll away. There's not too much to keep track of, but it's better to have a flat surface to work on where you're not going to drop a little washer and lose it, because there is a little washer in here that's a little bit tricky to keep track of. We're just going to pop this side out, this barrel screw out. And now I can show you. There we go. So right along here you can see this flat side, and there's another one on this side. And if you look at the frame, you can see the frame on this screwdriver side has a little flat side there and a little flat side there. And there's one other thing that has that flat side, and that's this little washer, or a pair of flat sides rather. There's a flat side here and another one here. And the reason this washer has those flat sides is so that when you rotate one bit to get it out, this washer will stay put. This washer won't spin, and therefore this other bit will not spin. So if you just had a normal washer in there and you were to spin it, the normal washer would probably spin and pull this other bit out with it, which that's a nice little detail that Leatherman puts into these. Okay, so to install these back together, we're just going to take our bits. We're going to install them in the closed position. So first goes the scalpel holder blade bit, and that goes on the same side as your main blade here. We're just going to drop that in the closed position, and then the same thing with the bit driver. Just drop that in the closed position. Now here comes the slightly tricky part. you want to line up those holes and then take your washer, and I use a pair of little tweezers just to hold it, and slide that washer in there. And these tweezers come in handy in a second here as well. So just kind of slide that into place. It doesn't matter if everything's perfectly lined up, because the next step, you're going to take something tapered, like these tweezers for me are perfect. They've got that nice taper to them. They can easily fit through this hole. So I put my tweezers through, and just kind of spin it a little bit to line everything up. And at the same time, I'm going to start pushing on this bit driver, and I'm going to push that way, basically pinning everything against this side here. Once you've got that set, you could put this piece back on, and then take your barrel screw and put that back in. And remember, this has two flat sides that need to fit through those two flat sides on the washer. So it's probably not just going to go straight through. Once it hits that washer, it'll stop. But as long as things haven't shifted after you've put your tapered tool, like your tweezers, through, you can take your screwdriver bit and rotate this screw as you're keeping pressure on your left thumb. Rotate it, and once those flat sides line up, it will slide in. Now you can see there's nothing holding it in there, but I can't turn this back and forth. There's a little bit of movement, but that's where those two flat sides are coming into play. And from there, we're pretty much done. We're going to put this back on, put this bolt back in, and now you don't need the other screwdriver. So once it's installed, things should open pretty smoothly, and they shouldn't clump together. I put a couple of raised surfaces on these, like this here, and also on the other side, this here. Those are about 1/10 of a millimeter wider than the rest of the part, which just gives a little bit extra clearance to help prevent the holder from either catching against the frame or catching against the screwdriver head. That said, keep in mind that this metal part was once a molten wax part inside of a soft rubber mold. So I do my best to kind of take these out of the mold, and after they're done casting, I'll straighten them up as much as I can, but you may find that you need to do just a little bit of gentle bending to one side or the other if it's wanting to bind up on one of those. And to do that, you just hold the tool firmly and then just push just a little bit in one direction or the other. So this is the first time I've installed this one here, and at this point it opens smoothly, but both of those tools are a little bit loose. So what I recommend doing is basically over tightening this. You don't want to tighten so you strip out those flat sides or anything by putting too much pressure, but just make it tighter than you want. I mean, you don't want to have to break your fingernail to getting that out. So over tighten it and then back it out just a little bit at a time until both of them open smoothly and don't have any play, like side to side play, once it's open. It's still a little bit firmer than it should be. This is also a good introduction to just tuning and adjusting your Leatherman tools in general, if you've never done it before, because these pivot screws, they change over time. They get dirt in them or start to rust and things. So over time, some of these tools can start to get really difficult to open up. Like I've come across a number of these waves where the scissors, for example, are nearly impossible to get out, or any of these smaller tools. So as we've now learned, it's pretty easy to just loosen up those screws or tune those screws a little bit and get them nice and smooth. And if you ever do that on this side, just note that there's two of those little washers, one here and one here on this side. So this one becomes a little bit more tricky because the scissors are two parts, plus you've got the other two screwdriver bits and those little washers. So this one's much easier. Let's go ahead and install that blade. So if you've never used a scalpel blade before, which, you know, like I said, I've used them a lot for making these rubber molds for jewelry work, so I'm familiar with the process, but it's pretty simple. You've got this bar here that has an undercut underneath here, a little channel, a little slot, and that matches the cutout that's in this shape. So what you do is you first install the blade onto that front side through the bigger opening and just slide it back, and it'll snap down in the back. And when these are newer, keep in mind that this bronze is a softer material than the steel, surgical steel of the blade. So the surgical steel will probably polish up those grooves a little bit more. I have to hand cut each of these, or have to hand grind the grooves on each of these, so I do my best to get them all operating perfectly smoothly before, you know, I'm going to ship them out. But yours may be slightly tighter, especially depending on if you buy some different blades. I've tested these with 3 different blades, and I ship them out with a couple of this particular brand, and I've got them to where they fit with, you know, all the types of blades that I've encountered. And I'll leave a link in the comments or in the description where to find some of the blades that I use. These particular ones are fairly old. They were given to me, and you typically buy them in a box, in a 100-pack like this here, and they come in little sterile packages like this, little sleeves, and it costs about $10 for 100 of them, so you're only paying about 10 cents a piece. So that makes it really nice to be able to just have a really cheap but really sharp replaceable blade on your tool, to where you don't have to worry about messing up your main blade if you need to, say, cut through some cardboard on concrete, or cutting something where you may risk hitting a staple, or just cutting something that's questionable in general. So you can see that that tucks in there nicely. The blade isn't making contact with the frame or anything, so it's not going to dull it. You still have the same, or I designed it to have the same fingernail hook that the screwdriver bit has, as opposed to the notch that the can opener uses. And then as the tool closes, you can see it still clears the plier head perfectly fine. So that's pretty much it. The inspiration from this, you know, I've been thinking about doing something like this for a while, but I bought my dad a Wave a while ago, and he mentioned something about wanting to have a really sharp blade for, he's a carpenter, and so he wanted to have something that was always razor sharp in case he needed to whittle down like a carpenter's pencil or something. And he was thinking about grinding down the serrated blade to do that. And so it got me thinking I might as well just come up with a solution to get rid of this can opener, which I've always found kind of pointless, and I know a lot of other people do too, but also make it so that you didn't have to give up your main blade, which the main blade is a pretty useful part of any multi-tool to me. So just be careful when you're closing this. Keep your fingers out of the way. It is extremely sharp. And, you know, my dad always used to carry an old-timer knife, one of those very simple, thin, 2-blade pocket knives. And all of those that I've ever seen that have been around for a while, the secondary blade would always be treated as, you know, this pristine backup knife that was always kept razor sharp in case you needed to do something like carve down a carpenter's pencil, or it was just, you know, completely beat up and trashed and used to cut things where you might wind up damaging your main blade. So this kind of meets both of those requirements. I'm making these in fairly small batches. They do take me a long time to make, if you count all of the processing time from the casting to all of the cutting out of the the slots and the channels and grinding down and sanding and then polishing. And these two here, I've put maybe a little bit more of a polish on them than the others, just because why not? I have all the equipment here, but it's too time intensive for me to be able to put a jewelry finish polish on all of them. So most of them are going to come out looking, still quite nice. This is kind of a standard one, and I don't know that you can tell the difference in this video, but the nice thing is if you feel like polishing it up more at home, it's pretty easy to do. Just with a little polishing compound and a Dremel or something, you can make them really smooth and slick looking. And I will coat all of these with a protective wax coating, just to slow the tarnishing effect on them and keep them shinier longer. But if you clean your tools, maybe don't clean them with like something that's going to strip that wax off, or your other protective oils on your tool in general, and just oil it. And that's about it. And one more thing that I wanted to mention is just the installation of the blade. I talked about the installation. I didn't really talk about the de-installation. So let's go back to this. I recommend, while you're learning how to do this, especially if it's kind of stiff getting it off and on there, to use a pair of pliers like you saw me do earlier, to grab the blade here and then pull it off with the pliers. But you can't just pull it straight out. You'll see on the back side there's this little cutout section here. You basically lift the blade from that section there. So you lift it up above this center bar, and then you can pull the blade straight out. And I'll use the pliers just to keep my fingers out of the way and set a good example. And it should just slide right out there. So make sure that you're not pointing this at yourself when you pull that off, or somebody else or your pets or anything. And then to install it, just do the same thing. Grab the blade by this part right above that notch, that cutout, and line it up on there and slide it into place. So again, to remove it, just lift up here, grab this part, and it should just slide right out. And as you get more comfortable, maybe you'll feel a little bit better about doing it without a secondary pair of pliers. But it's good to have another tool on hand. I know all the instructional videos that you'll probably see out there say to use a pair of forceps or something like that to change out these blades. But again, just lift right here, grab here, and pull out. And occasionally it may bind when you're installing it, and if it does, just pull it back off and try again. It could just be that the blade is going on slightly cockeyed or twisted or something, so it should just slide on pretty easily and cleanly.